Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this next of our talks, lectures for the Lord Lyons Society. A bit of housekeeping just to say thank you all for your support of the Lord Lyons Society, but also to ask you to keep muted if you can throughout the presentation. And we are going to record this so that we can put it up for other people to hear afterwards. Tonight's talk is given by someone that I think is one of the most remarkable people that I've met in recent times, Sir Geoff Palmer, who is a Jamaican British academic with a human rights activist background. He was professor at Heriot-Watt University in the Department of Life Sciences, and I had to go and read all about this, but he discovered barley abrasion process, which I had no idea what that was about. But it involves deliberately damaging the protective husks of the grain to speed up the process of malting. Well, he must be one of the most favoured and favourite men of Scotland because he gets beer made more quickly. And if I've understood the science of it, he's going to be loved for centuries for his ability to actually get beer, the process of making beer more quickly. But of course, he's very distinguished, recognized by many universities by honorary degrees, and also he's been knighted and become very recently a Knight of the Thistle. His topic tonight is A Knight's Tale, but in terms of reflecting on his life, it would not do justice in an introduction for me to say much more because I could go on at length. But I can say that in my brief and infrequent meetings with him, he's one of the most approachable and one of the most resilient people that I've met in recent years. And I've found him to be a great inspiration about how to deal with life and keep it going and keep it moving. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would ask you now to give your attention fully to Sir Geoff Palmer, who's going to tell us his life tale of becoming a knight. So, Geoff, over to you.
Thank you very much. And that was, my mother would say, "Who are they talking about?" Because basically, both of us were born in Jamaica. My mother comes from a parish, it's called Manchester. And I was born in St. Elizabeth, which is next door. And I didn't know I had any Scottish connections, of course, when you're born in Jamaica in 1940. The main event in your life in Jamaica, despite some parts of Jamaica is regarded as very aggressive, the main aspect of my life when I was there is going to church. And believe it or not, Jamaica has one of the highest percentages of churches per acre than any other country in the world. And that is interesting because Jamaica was a very important piece of land in the British Empire. Jamaica was taken by the British from the Spanish in 1655. And it never changed hands. The British defended it. And of course, Scotland came in 1707. And I think it's Article 4 of the Union gave the Scots, I would say, permission to then go to the colonies and better themselves. That's one of the terms that was used. Now, as I said, my mother came from Manchester and I'm from St. Elizabeth. And it was only much later in my life, looking at my birth certificate, that I realized I was born in Monroe College District. And there's a very distinguished college in the Monroe College area, which, wasn't a school that I would go to. It's a private school, so you have to pay. But I was born in the district. So the Monroe, it's the Scottish Monroe, so that was my first link with Scotland. I didn't know it, but that's what you find if you travel around Jamaica. You will find Scottish names like St. Andrew, which is one of the biggest parishes in Jamaica. And of course, the Jamaica flag is very similar, or it's identical, except for colours, to the Scottish, St. Andrew's image. And therefore, those links between Jamaica and Scotland has been there for a long time. And of course, you have many, I don't know how many now, but you have many Jamaica streets. I think you've got one in Glasgow, one in Edinburgh, I think one in Aberdeen, and there were more in the past. And of course, I will discuss this, but you also have many Rodney streets. And one may be saying to oneself, well, what's Rodney got to do with Jamaica and Scotland? But that link is very significant. But if you go back to my beginning, as I said, one of the main things that I had to do in Jamaica as a boy is go to church 3 times every Sunday. And morning service, Sunday school, and evening service. And this applies to, you'll get a big, great, tough guy during the week, but on Sundays in church. So one of the legacies of colonialism in an island like Jamaica, and probably on many other the West Indian islands, is this religious aspect of the culture. So my mother got, as I say, she was married, but she and my father took me to Kingston. That's the capital. And but my father left the family, my brother and I and my mother, in about 1947. So I was born in 1940, and my father left and went off to America. And I never saw him again until 1975. But we will come to that. So I'm with my mother at 7. And she decided to come to London in 1951. And she left me and my brother with her sisters, which is not uncommon that mothers leave their children when their husbands or partner leaves. And as I said, she came in 1951 and I joined her in 1955. She came to London and worked at a post office in the night, sorting mailbags. Although she was a dressmaker, that was the job available, but she wanted to save my fares to come here, to join her, to help her to work. So she sent money and I traveled on my own from Jamaica in 1955 to join my mother. And I arrived at Liverpool on a boat called the Ascania. And in March 1955. And I didn't know where Paddington was. She said she would meet me in Paddington. And I got off the ship at Liverpool and I walked around the streets and I asked people where Paddington was. And they told me that they said I had to get a train. And I got a train and I went to Paddington. And when I arrived at Paddington, a black lady came up behind me and grabbed me by the collar and said, "Come, I'm your mother." And so I went with this woman. We often joked about it before she passed away, that I said, "How the hell did I know you're my mother?" But nevertheless, she took me with her and she lived in Islington, near Pentonville Prison, where they hanged people. That's where she lived. And I went with her and we went to up to her. She had a room at the top of the house. She rented it. So a lot of people then rented rooms in houses, and she had rented a room in this house. And she took me there. And we both stayed in this one room. What happened? We had something to eat. We went to our bed. She had 2 single beds. And she woke me up at 6 o'clock the next morning. I just traveled 5,000 miles. She woke me up about 6 o'clock. And I said, "Mother, why have I got to get up so early?" And she said, "Because you're going to work." And I said, "Work?" I'd never heard the term. I heard about going to church, but not going to work. She said, "You're going to work to help me pay the rent and pay the bills." So anyway, I had some breakfast and she took me down the stairs and we got to the door. I'll never forget it. We got to the door in Islington. Not far from Pentonville Prison. And when we opened the door, there was a man at the door, standing with a briefcase, 3-piece suit, And he said to my mother, "Where are you going?" This was about 7:30. And 7:15, 7:45. And my mother said, "This is my son. He came from Jamaica yesterday, and we're going to work." And the man said, "You can go to work, but he can't." And my mother said, "Why? Why not?" And he said, "Because he's not 15. And my mother says, "What's that got to do with anything?" And the man said, "Because in this country, you cannot leave school." That was then. You cannot leave school until you're 15. So my mother said, "But my son's birthday is only a month away. This is March. His birthday is the 9th of April. And the man said, "He's still got a month and he's got to go to school. He's got to finish school. I don't make the rules." I remember him saying that distinctively. "I don't make the rules. He's got to go to school." So my mother, all the begging and the pleading didn't work. And she took me to a school the next morning, the local school. And they gave her a note, which I read because she didn't bother to read it. I read it. And it said, the school gave my mother a note. And the note read, ESN, educationally subnormal. That's 1955. In March, the local school, I won't call its name, said I was ESN, educationally subnormal, and that I should go down to the school nearby, which was Shelburne Road Secondary Modern, which was at Nags Head. This is the irony, near the women's prison. And so my mom took me there to Shelburne Road Secondary Modern. And the headmaster, Mr. Bullen, actually said, he didn't know me. He just said, "I will not take you for a month. I will take you for a term, a summer term, because I don't want you to ruin my register." And I think by that, he wanted a full line of attendance. He didn't want just, a bit of a line. So my mom had to accept that. And I went to Shelburne Road Secondary Modern for the term. Unfortunately, it was the summer term. If it was the winter term, then I wouldn't be speaking to you today. Because being the summer term, I was playing cricket in the playground. And the games teacher came up to me and said, "Meet me here after school today." And I had to comply. I didn't know why he wanted to see me. So I met him after school and he said, "I'm taking you for a trial." And I didn't know what that meant. So he took me to a place called Gans Hill. And I went with him. And I find it very strange because they asked me to bowl and bat. So it was a cricket trial. And the next morning, he called me out of my class. And he said, "Come here, boy." And I said, "Sir, what have I done?" And he said, "You're playing for London." Well, playing for London was a grammar school boy's prerogative in 1955. Secondary modern schoolboys don't play for London. So I was picked to play for London. And the fixtures of the London schoolboys cricket team, the fixtures, were schools which I'd never heard about. They were Eton, Harrow, and Winchester. That's what they were called. And another one was called Middlesex Colt. So we had a fixture of 4 teams to play, I was told. And the school gave me some whites, white shirt, white trousers, and a pair of white boots. And I played for London against those schools. And I remember I was given a young man to look after me. You're given a minder when you play. And I remember I noticed that they were staying in a sort of he took me to where he stayed, and there were like 20 beds in this one room, sort of a long room. And I thought, my God, these young lads must be so poor, because with us migrants and stuff, there's sometimes 4 to a room or 3, but there were 20. So I said to him, why so many of you staying in one room? And he said, "Oh, because that's what we do." And he said to me, "What does your daddy do?" And I said, "Well, my daddy's in New York, and I think he's involved with gaming." And he says, "So is my daddy. He's in the city." And again, it was something I didn't understand about 20 boys in one room. And therefore I was beginning to learn the nature of the society, from being designated educationally subnormal to not understanding Eton, Harrow, and Winchester. Well, anyway, the fact that I was playing for London appeared in the Islington Gazette. That's the local newspaper of the area my mum and I lived in, the Islington Gazette. And an article appeared that I was playing for London, representing London. And the headmaster of the local grammar school, Mr. King, rang my school when he saw that article and said he wanted me transferred to Highbury County Grammar School. And of course, my mother was very upset when the headmaster of Shelburne Road put the proposal to her. And we went to see Mr. King, the headmaster of the grammar school, and he gave her £5 and to assist with my uniform. So I was transferred to Highbury County on the basis of my cricket. And I stayed at that grammar school, Highbury County, from 1955 to 1958. And of course, one of my main jobs there was to play cricket. um, I left in 58 because I felt I should go to work. And I got a job at Queen Elizabeth's College in London. Queen Elizabeth's College. It's part of London University in Kensington. And in 1958, that was the Notting Hill Gate riots. So I had to get off the train at Notting Hill Gate and almost fight my way to work in 1958. But the interview with Professor Chapman was interesting because I arrived for the interview at Queen Elizabeth's College. Very important because it was in the same college as the Department of Nutrition, which was a new department or a new topic, I should say. And I was sitting in a room and Professor Chapman came in and said, "Are you the young man for the job as technician, junior lab technician?" And I said, "Yes, sir." 1958. And he just said, "What's your name, young man?" And I said, "Godfrey Henry Oliver Palmer, sir." And he said, "You can have the job if I can call you Geoff." And I said, "Fine." So that's how people started to call me Geoff. It was Professor Chapman's deal. Right. And a lot of people don't realize my real name is Godfrey. But that was fine with me. A lot of people today would say, "Gosh, you changed your name. You know, that wasn't right." But I worked cleaning and looking after students from 1958. 1959, one day, Professor Chapman stopped me and he said, "Could you come to my room, young man?" And I said, "Fine, sir." And I didn't know what it was about. He got me to sit down in his room and I said, "I want you," and he said to me, "I want you out this building by 1961. He said, "I'm going to give you time off for you to get your A levels or the grades you need to get to university." And I said, "Gosh, my mother will go crazy." However, I said, "Yes, I will have a go." So I went to night school from 1958. And by 1961, I had the A level and O level required to go to university, but no university would take me in 1961. And Chapman called me into his room again on a Friday afternoon. And when I told him that, he sent me out his room and he came out in 10 minutes. And he said, "You're going to Leicester University." He had telephoned Leicester University and had arranged my entrance to the university in 1961. So I went to Leicester University in 1961, and I got an honours degree in botany by 1964. So by 1964, I got an honours degree from Leicester University. I went back to London and I couldn't get a job. In fact, I went to the Labour Exchange and the guys at the Labour Exchange asked me what qualification I had. And I said, I got a degree. And the one who asked me that question turned to his colleague in the Labour Exchange and he said, this guy's got a temperature. Degree, temperature. The fact is that I was ridiculed to say I had a degree. So they gave me a job in a restaurant, which I took. It was peeling potatoes. So I took a job in Nag's Head, near Finsbury Park, peeling potatoes with an honours degree in botany. I then applied for 2 jobs. The first one, I didn't realize it until I went into the room to be interviewed. I applied for 2 jobs because I wanted to get into research. I didn't want to work the restaurant of my life. So I went for this first interview to do a master's at Reading University. And one of the panelists was probably the 2nd or 3rd most powerful politician in Britain at the time. He was on the panel. And when I went into the room, he looked at me and he said, sit down, and I sat. And he said, before it was the beginning of the interview, he just said, if I were you, I would go back to where you come from and grow bananas. And I said to him, when I can grow bananas in Haringey, that's when I'll go home, because Haringey is my home now. In fact, my mother had moved. And that was my response, because that was now my sense of belonging. I not only had a British history from 1655, I now have a sense of belonging from 1955 to 1964. And therefore, I'm going nowhere. I'm part of this country. And therefore, I was fighting for my rights. And of course, I didn't get the position. So I went back peeling potatoes at Beale's restaurant at Nag's Head in London. And then there was a second job. I applied for that. And that was in Edinburgh at the Heriot Watt College then. It wasn't a university. And I came up from London and attended the interview on Chambers Street. The entire Heriot Watt was on Chambers Street in Edinburgh, opposite the museum. And I was interviewed by a wonderful woman called Professor Anna MacLeod. Anna MacLeod, there is one of the accommodations at the Heriot Watt today is named after her. She was a fellow of the Royal Society, daughter of the clergy, And she interviewed me on Chambers Street. I think it was December 1964. And she took me to do research, and it was to do a PhD. And I started to do my research on barley, which I wasn't familiar with. But I started to do my research. And but before I begin, a lovely story about Anna. And I said, Anna, you were telling me about barley, and I didn't know anything about it. And I know I wasn't paying much attention. And she said, which is typical of Anna, she was ahead of her time in concepts. And Anna said to me, she said, when I was telling you about the brewing and distilling industries and about their significance in Scotland, you were looking out the window. And I said, well, I thought I should be paying more attention. And she said, that was a very good point in your favor. And I said, how can taking no interest be a very good point in my favor? She said, because it means you won't bother me. And that was Anna's approach to research. She allowed me to do what I thought was necessary. She didn't tell me. So I had to go away and read about the industry and the research they'd done and how could I improve it. And again, this is the nature of my life, that the fact is that I had to find a way to find something innovative. And I've been doing that since 1955. So I started the research on barley, and it took me 2 years to do my PhD. And one of the concepts I came up with then was that the industry believed the germ controlled malting. The whole world believed that when you grow a barley in a malting plant anywhere in the world, Scotland, in Buckie, or East Anglia, and different parts of Britain, the germ controlled enzyme production. That means the enzymes digest the grain, and they came from the germ. My concept, which I came up from my research, the germ did not produce the enzyme. It was the bran. It's called the aleuron. A-L-E-U-R-O-N-E, the aleuron. That's the scientific name. The ordinary name, we call it the bran. So for the first time in hundreds of years of research, somebody has come up by saying, your scientific concept is wrong. And if you're going to improve the technology, you've got to accept that the aleuron, the bran, is the cells in barley that produce enzymes that change barley into malt. And this caused a lot of problem for me because a lot of the British industry wouldn't accept it. But Anna published it in Nature. And Nature, as I said, published it. And that started an international response to me by saying I was wrong. Nobody was providing evidence that I was. They just said whether it was Carlsberg. And Carlsberg is a big research entity. It's not just beer. The protein analysis on your food was developed at Carlsberg. So therefore, that's the nature of the research carried on in Copenhagen. And they were doubting my work. Well, anyway, I finished my PhD and I went and worked for the brewers in Surrey. The brewers have a very large research institute then in 1968. 1968. So I went there and I developed the concept of the brand. And that concept, as the Lord Lion said, led to the barley abrasion process. And the barley abrasion process was developed in 1968-69. So I took the scientific concept from Edinburgh that the germ didn't do it in terms of enzymes. The germ produced a hormone, very significant hormone, which is used in agriculture. So the abrasion process is to scrape the grain at the back, not at the front where the germ is, because that would damage the germ. I had to develop a machine that scraped the barley at the back because the bran goes right round the grain. So if I scrape the grain at the back and then treat the grain with a spray with the hormone which the germ produces, the grain will molt from both ends, the front and the back, because the bran starts at the front of the grain and goes round it. So I produce the grain which like two germs. So the grain molting at the back and the front, it took 2 days of the molting time. And the grain was malted better than normal. Now, my boss at the Research Institute in Surrey wouldn't accept that either. And he threatened me. My wife's upstairs, because I met her at Leicester University in 1961. She's Scottish descent. And my boss threatened me that if this process doesn't go into industry or is accepted by the world, you're going to be fired. And I had to make a decision. Either I pursued the work and give it to the industry, that's what I wanted to do, or you will be fired. So I took the risk, and the Watney Truman Company was the first major company to apply the process. And we got a machine built in Manchester. And that machine abraded, initially my abrader was 10 grams a treatment. I could only do 10 grams per treatment. That's the first machine, so to speak. But this other machine, which went into industry, which I helped to develop, did 10 tons an hour. 10 tons an hour. And Bass Charrington's, Burton-on-Trent, Allied Breweries, who had a brewery in Alloa, Allied Breweries, Bass Charrington had 10 machines doing 10 tons an hour. And Allied Breweries never told us how many machines they had. And Watney Truman also had machines abrading grain, and they made millions of pounds from the process. Of course, I didn't get anything because that was part of my job, my contract. So that's the nature of the abrading process. It was a process that the grain processed itself from both ends rather than just one. And that gave me a form of international reputation. And I left the Research Institute and came back to Edinburgh in 1977. 1977. And when I came back to Edinburgh in 1977, the Coors Brewery in Colorado, Mr. Coors himself, who all the Americans says was a racist, but Bill Coors invited me to Colorado and I went. And we signed a contract for £70,000 in 1977 for the Harriet Ward, which was at Chambers Street then, as I said. And I did research for Coors for 4 years while teaching at the Harriet Ward. And I don't have time, but at the Harriet Ward, I persuaded the distilling industry and the brewing industry that we need an international centre for brewing and distilling in Scotland. International Centre for Brewing and Distilling, and the distilling industry gave me £1 million. And I used that £1 million to set up the International Centre for Brewing and Distilling, which is at the Harriet Watt today, teaching students from all over the world. And so the whiskey industry gave me £1 million. And that's why I promote my friend Robert Burns, because in his John Barleycorn, his poem, John Barleycorn, he actually describes, believe you me, Robert Burns described the malting process. The malting process, that's a poem about the malting process. And what Burns did with that was he described the steeping, the germination stage, and the kilning at the end. And it's a poem which is stating that look at a barley grain, it looks insignificant. If you just take a handful of barley, there's no apparent significance. But in that poem, Burns, believe you me, what he says about the process of producing malt is absolutely accurate. So he must have been in a malting. So he was aware about the powerful verse in Burns. He ends that poem by saying, that, we must take a glass because he hopes that whiskey will be in the future very successful. And I think it goes something like, then let us toast John Barleycorn, each man a glass in hand, and may his prosperity never fails in all Scotland. And that was written in 1782. Then let us toast John Barleycorn, each man a glass in hand, and may his prosperity never fails in all Scotland. And therefore, I feel that I've contributed to that with the International Centre for Brewing and Distilling. And students come from all over the world to study there today. And just finally, because I'm looking at the clock, finally, is that my life is about, not just about what ability I have, it's about the goodness, again, as Burns calls it, the goodness that mitigates woe. The people who've helped me to be here today. The man at the door in 1955 who insisted I had to go to school for a month. Mr. King, the headmaster of the grammar school, who took me. And also Anna MacLeod in Edinburgh, who gave me the chance for the PhD. And there are other people who've helped. So I'm not a self-made man. I'm a man who people have helped. So fighting is not just about yourself. It's about the goodness. As Burns says, that mitigates woe. And finally, the Guinness, I was sitting in my office at Chambers Street when I became a professor. My telephone rang and it was Guinness. And Guinness said, would you go to Africa for us? And I said, I left Africa under very difficult circumstances 200 years ago, or 250 years. And I don't know whether I should go back. And of course, the Guinness production director laughed, and he said, we thought you would say something like that. But I went to Nigeria for Guinness in the 1980s because the government, Guinness has 4 breweries in Nigeria. And so does Heineken. And they make a lot of money. So they couldn't afford for the government to close them, these breweries, because they banned the import of barley malt, European malt. So Guinness said they wanted me to go to Africa to see what they could do. And they had a concept of growing barley in the north of Nigeria, which I thought was not very wise. But I went to the north of Nigeria for Guinness. I went. And what was interesting, to cut a long story short, I just said, use the local grain. And they said, use sorghum to make Guinness. I said, yes, do it. Because it can be done. Because we'd done some research at the Heriot Ward to show it was possible. And eventually they did. And that action has changed the agriculture of Africa. Because now small individual farmers grow sorghum for big international companies like Guinness and Heineken. And that concept has spread all over Africa. So again, Scotland, we not only did the abrasion, we also came up with the concept of using sorghum, which is now a national crop throughout Africa. Because we said they should use it, and they did. And you can get in Scotland a Guinness made from sorghum in Scotland at the moment. And one of my students brought it along to the award ceremony for the Saltire Society. So again, that's another aspect of the education. And I will end with a couple of stories about Scottishness when I've traveled abroad. And when I went to Nigeria, the immigration officer, black guy, actually said to me, I had to pay, I think it was £50 or something like that. And I only had Clydesdale banknotes. So I took out some Clydesdale banknotes to pay him to enter Nigeria in the 80s. And he said, I don't want that. He said, that's monopoly money. I want sterling. So, of course, my Scottishness came out, and I said to him, you see the back of this note? That's Stirling Castle, because he said he wanted sterling. I said, I said, do you know that building? I said, that's Stirling Castle. And he laughed, and he engaged his gun. He had an automatic gun. And he said, don't mess me about. He said, I went to Glasgow University. So again, our education is there. And the final story was the Americans awarded me an award in, I think it was 1978. I've got a feeling it was when Scotland was playing in the World Cup, and they were playing Peru. And I was in America to receive an award. And this guy sitting next to me said, Dr. Palmer, your award is not till much later. I'm from Canada. Let you and I go and watch Scotland play in a pub. Because Scotland is playing Peru. I think this was in the 70s. And I said, well, I don't want to miss this award. It's the Americans, brewers, were giving me this award. But nevertheless, I went. He said he was Scottish, so we were going to watch Scotland play. And we found a pub, and we are sitting. We arrived, looked for a seat, and then we looked up at the television, and to our distress, Scotland was 3-0 down. So the whole pub could see our disappointment as we tried to find a seat. And my unknown Scottish companion, he looked at the people laughing at us and he turned to me and he said, "Let's fight them." And I turned to him and I said, "I don't think we do very well. Let's have a dram." So we sat and had a dram. I think the final score was 3-1.
Oh, well.
But again, finally, that's my experience of my education, where people have helped me. I've tried to put back. And in terms of what I try to do, again, taking a phrase from Burns, what I've tried to do is what Burns says in Scots way, using liberty's blow to not only run your own life, but also liberty's blow to help remove injustice wherever it is. And therefore, the last thing Burns wrote was a significant poem, was "A man's a man for all that, and that we should be brothers be." And therefore, that is my Scottish approach to our one humanity, where race doesn't exist. It's a myth. Nobody I've asked can define race. I've asked people up and down the world, define race. They can't. So therefore, we're one humanity, nothing less. Thank you.
Well done. Well, so Geoff, thank you very much for that very inspiring talk. And it was a great, in the best sense, a tale, because it created a whole image in my head of all sorts of social histories and things that you've gone through. Some of us will have lived similar experiences, but not in the way in which you've described it. So I'm greatly appreciated that you've given this talk in the way you've done. One of the hard things about these online talks is we're not able to give you the applause that you're due, because I'm sure that everybody that's out there would want to record a big hearty thanks to you by way of applause. So thank you very much for your contribution tonight. And I'm very glad that you're able to quote Robert Burns, who's a great friend to me. And one of the little things that's come up, excellent talk, Professor, it said. So that's come up onto the screen already. So Geoff's offered to do a few questions. Now, if you want to ask a question at this particular stage, can you unmute yourself and also go on camera so I can see you and put your hand up? But we'll take probably about 4 questions. So here's another quote for you. Interesting and inspiring talk. So there's lots of quotes coming up. Thank you. That was fascinating. What an incredible life. Another piece of information coming up. So anybody like to ask a question or a comment? I'm running through you all, or till I see somebody. There's Russell. Russell, will you unmute yourself, and then I'll take Max after that. So Russell, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, please. There were so many astonishing things for me, not least the trip on the Scania, but the trip from Liverpool to Paddington by train at the age of 14 in itself was astonishing. And who knew that Guinness, I didn't, had 4 breweries in Nigeria, and that they brew using different items. But what I wanted to ask was, all the way through everything you've told us, there is exactly what you specified at the end, which is it's the assistance of other people, it's a recognition of other people. And what I wonder is it simply people are helped as in your case, perhaps because people identify your talents and your specific talents? Do you have to be brilliant for people to help you up? Or are people who are less talented also able to have the benefit of that leg up as well? Do you think that happens?
Well, when I came, I wasn't recognized as having any talent.
No,
I
true.
was educationally subnormal.
Yes.
You can't get lower than that.
Mhm.
So I wasn't recognized as having any talent. That's the point.
Yeah.
Other people probably would have had some education that would be regarded as an example. But I was designated in 1955 as educationally subnormal, ineducable.
Right. Well, there's your answer.
Yep.
Right, Max, could you unmute yourself and ask your question or make your comment?
Of course. Thank you, Lord Lyon. And thank you, Sir Geoff. This is probably not a question, it's more a comment. I had the honor and the privilege of painting Sir Geoff about 10 years ago. And during the sittings, I do remember the conversations were extremely inspirational, learning more about him and what he has achieved. And it's a long story, but the portrait ultimately remained with me. You can see I put it in the easel up there, so you can see there. And during the conversations, I do remember we discussed about, or probably I encouraged Sir Geoff to petition for a grant of arms. So I just wanted to say I hope that happens at some point, because I'd love to be able to add the arms to the portrait. So it's just lovely to see you again and to hear your story again. Thank you, Lord Lyon, and thank you, Sir Geoff.
Well, I could answer that question
Thank you very much.
I can answer that question for Sir Geoff, that he has now a warranted set of arms with interesting supporters that will come out in due course. But that's been done. Now, anybody else would like to make comment or make a question? One last one. Let's see if we can get somebody flushed out from the group. There you are, number 2. I think Elizabeth. Well done. Nice to see you, Elizabeth. On you go. Unmute and let us see you.
Well, I can see me and I'm unmuted.
Yeah,
Geoff,
we can see you and we can hear you.
Geoff, that was wonderful and so very much you. I loved it. And thank you very much for giving us your time and wonderful way of talking. It was lovely. Bless you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for all you've done.
Right. Well, I think we'll probably wind up unless anybody else is desperate to come in. And again, all I can say is that it's just so hard to be able to give you the round of applause that you require. But I think with a lot of the comments that have gone earlier, people have been absolutely inspired by what you've said, and we all can unmute ourselves and give them a big round of applause. Geoff, thank you very much.
And thank you very much.
We wish you well. And all of us look forward to hearing what your next stage is.
Right.
And what next impact you're going to make, because it's an inspiration to see you work. And I look forward to seeing you soon. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. I don't want to take any more of your time, and I hope that you've been as inspired and as entertained as I have. And it's very hard to believe some of the things that actually, that people have responded to you in some of the ways that they are. But it's also very inspiring to see that when you were in these positions, you were able to kind of make your point back, and that shows a great deal of courage. And it's a wonderful thing to hear you talk. So good night, everybody.